Good afternoon. My name is Guy Horgan, and today I am happy to welcome R.P. Eddy to Google. R.P. We got his start on the National Security Council, after which he served as both a UN and United States diplomat. Today he is the CEO and founder of Ergo, a global intelligence and strategy firm that advises large governments and companies on a variety of matters. Today he is here to talk about his new book that he wrote alongside Richard Clarke called WARNINES: Finding Cassandras to Stop Catastrophes. He's going to give us a few prepared remarks, after which point we will do a Q&A together. RP, welcome to Google.
Thanks very much. Excited to be here. Today I want to talk about people who can see the future, people who can warn us of disasters, people who historically we ignore, and people we must stop ignoring. The man in that video at the end was Richard Clarke. He's my co-author. I had the real honor of working with Dick at the National Security Council in the mid-90s. One of Dick's primary missions then inside the White House was to convince the White House and other governments that a group called Al-Qaeda posed a massive threat to us, not just to us, but to our allies. At that time, terrorism was looked at as a largely national issue or regional issue. We thought of groups like Hezbollah or Kairos the Jackal, but we didn't think of big global movements like Al-Qaeda. Dick realized this was a massive threat to us and something that had to be taken more seriously. Dick tried to make his warnings heard. He wrote a series of important memos. He talked from president to president. Dick ultimately was ignored, and 9/11 happened. As you can imagine, Dick and I, and a small band of us who had worked on the Al-Qaeda issue, have looked back on that question over the years and asked how we failed, and asked how failures like this occur. One evening, he and I had a conversation, likely over a bottle of scotch, and we started realizing that disaster after disaster, there would be a commission, there'd be articles, there'd be journalists who would pursue it, and someone would come out, would stand out, who had predicted that disaster in great detail and been ignored. We realized there seemed to be a pattern of these people, and that perhaps was worth looking into further. In Greek mythology, there was a woman named Cassandra. She was a beautiful mortal, and she refused to sleep with Apollo. Apollo's curse to her was that every time she foretold a disaster, in fact, he allowed her to foretell disasters, she would be ignored. Cassandra then, being from Troy, saw the sack of her city, saw her brothers killed, saw her family destroyed, her home destroyed, her entire city burned to the ground. She saw this in perfect detail well before it occurred and warned and warned and warned. And Cassandra went crazy with her warnings, crazy that no one listened to her. So we decided to go look for modern-day Cassandras. And boy, did we find them. What we found was a huge number of people who were ignored. But not just warnings, not sandwich plate, crazy people on the street corner saying the sky is going to fall, but people with shockingly clear, data-driven warnings, eminently qualified experts who were telling us about events of massive consequence. You know, yes, we are right to ignore many warnings of disaster, but there are some we have to listen to. And when we don't find these Cassandras and we don't listen to them, people die. I'll talk about a couple examples of this. Some of these are awfully painful. We went out and interviewed as many of the Cassandras as we could find, and it was a fascinating and sad experience. We learned a lot. These are extraordinary people who gave these warnings and were ignored. Another example of a Cassandra that was ignored, another extremely poignant example, is Charlie Allen. Charlie was the National Intelligence Officer for Warning. This is a job in an organization called the National Intelligence Council that sits above the CIA. Charlie was a career intelligence professional, and he realized in '89 that Saddam Hussein was going to invade Kuwait. Charlie had a variety of intelligence that was giving him high confidence of this concern, and he brought it to the interagency. He brought it to the DOD, brought it to state, brought it to the deputies, brought it to the cabinet. Everybody ignored Charlie all the way along the line. He had a power to write something called a warning of war. By virtue of his position, he could write a letter that would land on the president's desk. So Charlie wrote the warning of war. It ended up at the White House. The president looked at it, and it said, "I'm telling you, Saddam Hussein will invade Kuwait. It might be a few months from now, but it's coming soon." Charlie had extraordinary confidence in this, and again, it was data-driven. Of course, Charlie was ignored, and the first Gulf War occurred. We call it the first Gulf War because then we had a second Gulf War. If you think about what ended up occurring, the price we paid from the first Gulf War, from Saddam's invasion of Kuwait, it's fairly extraordinary. One thing that might not be as obvious is that American troop presence in Saudi Arabia, we put troops there to protect Saudi Arabia at this moment, was the entire raison d'etre of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda did not exist until we put troops there. Al-Qaeda had no raison d'etre until we did that. Al-Qaeda was born because we put troops there because Saddam invaded Kuwait. Of course, Saddam's invasion of Kuwait in the first Gulf War and al-Qaeda led to the second Gulf War. We're talking about 25 years of destabilization in the region, trillions of dollars of treasure spent, millions of lives lost. And Charlie, the man who got it right, well, he was threatened with being fired. He was screamed at, yelled at for giving the warning, and the National Intelligence Officer for Warning position has since been abolished. We're not very good at listening to these people. The final example I'll give is of Fukushima. Dr. Okamura is a noted seismologist in Japan, and when the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant was being built, he came to them in every open hearing and said, you cannot build this nuclear reactor where you are. You are too close to the shoreline, you are too low. If you do, a tsunami will come and will destroy it. He knew the tsunami, he knew the speed, he knew the time. He said, you're 40 years overdue, for a tsunami. He knew precisely the one that would come. He was able to go and look in the mountainsides above the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant and find sand and stones that came from this Jogan tsunami. Now the problem with the tsunami he foretold was it was from 8869. It was a long time ago. So he would go to hearing after hearing a noted PhD seismologist from a noted center of seismology and warn them, do not build this plant where you're building it. And every time he would show up, they would say, Dr. Okamura, thanks for coming. The hearing today is about earthquakes, not tsunamis. Well, when's the meeting on tsunamis? We don't know yet. The meeting on tsunamis was never scheduled. He never was able to be listened to. He was ignored repeatedly. So what happened because of his warning not being heard? Well, the tsunami wave showed up at the precise wave height he warned, about the same time he said it would happen. It rushed inshore at 435 miles an hour, crested the wall, and destroyed all the backup power at Fukushima, leading to the largest nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. 19,000 people died in Japan, and many of them tragically died when they went to tsunami evacuation spots that were too low. Even the tsunami evacuation spots hadn't been built to the proper height. And Fukushima, what happens when a nuclear power plant has no power? It melts down, it explodes, it spews toxic and radioactive gases, and that's what happened here. We estimate that if TEPCO, the builder of the Fukushima plant, had spent the money making the improvements that Dr. Okamura had suggested, it would have cost them $50 million. It's a real number, but it's cost $100 billion to clean up the nuclear disaster and will probably lead to 10,000 deaths from the ongoing radiation poisoning and cancers. That's a 2,000 times return on the investment. Those examples and many others were predicted in nearly perfect detail by highly credible, data-driven experts, yet we ignored them, one after the other, and we continue to do this. So the only question that Dick and I could ask is, what the hell is wrong with us? Why are we doing this wrong? Why don't we get this? Every one of these experts had massive numbers of similarities. So we realized there was a clear pattern through these interviews. One thing that was pretty fascinating is they all said to us two sentences. Every Cassandra we interviewed said two things to us. One was, when I discovered this data, when I figured out what was happening, I wanted to be wrong. So I went to my colleagues and said, please look at my data. Please study what I think I found. Tell me this is inaccurate. And of course, in all instances, their colleagues couldn't. And the second thing they all said was, well, now that I knew it was right, I took it to the decision makers and presumed they would act on it. And of course, they didn't, or else they wouldn't be Cassandras. And when they ignored it, I said to them, why are you ignoring your own data? This wasn't proprietary insight. This was publicly available data that they provided. So that was one thing they had in common. Another thing we realized they had in common was that there were 4 sets of characteristics across every Cassandra event. We call this the Cassandra coefficient. The first one is the warning itself. The second is the decision makers. The third, the Cassandra. And the fourth, the critics. Each one of those things can help us identify if a warner is a Chicken Little or a Cassandra. Now, this Cassandra coefficient is only the beginning. This book is very clear in describing itself not as a perfectly scientific tome. There's a team at MIT working on that now, doing a series of analyses to figure out how to make this Cassandra coefficient more accurate. And I hope someone else will look at that as well. But there are some very powerful patterns that we found in here. I will mention only 2 of the 24 Cassandra coefficients, 2 that we think are relatively interesting. The first one is called initial occurrence syndrome. Many of these disasters occurred and nothing like it had ever occurred, never occurred before. Initial occurrence syndrome has to do with our human bias, availability heuristic and normalcy bias. It's very hard for us to imagine something happening that hasn't happened before. Very difficult for us to see totally novel events in our head. This is a quote by Chairman Ben Bernanke, one of the most intelligent men ever to serve in the US government, highly credentialed, highly smart, and in this instance he falls fully victim to initial occurrence syndrome. What he's saying here is we've never had the entire nation have a real estate decline in prices, and since we haven't, we won't. And since we won't have a full employment problem or an economic downturn. He said that in July 2005. When you see words like never before, you should look twice and wonder why people were thinking this. Was he right? Of course he was dramatically wrong. The 2008 collapse happened entirely because of a nationwide collapse in real estate. The 2008 collapse is also notable for another Cassandra. Meredith Whitney, a young Wall Street analyst, began to do the homework on Citibank very early on in 06, 07 and realized that they were going to fail as a company. The largest firm in the world was going to collapse. Meredith had the numbers, she had the data, she produced her estimate. She was obviously right, but until she was right, what did she get in return? Death threats, threats of being fired, and extraordinarily sexist responses. She then was correct about Lehman and then Bear. In every instance, she was ahead of the market. She was ahead of the naysayers. This Cassandra was correct. The other major category of why we get things wrong has to do with not so much our biases. And if you look at the Cassandra coefficient, there's a large number of things that are highly related to human biases. The other one has to do with the massive complexity in the world. I call this the acceleration of history. We were all taught how the Second Industrial Revolution of 1870 led to World War I, which led to World War II. When you have technological revolutions, you end up with massive displacements. Yes, you have winners, but for all the winners, you have losers. The losers often tend to be the employed class, the blue-collar class, as it's been in every technological revolution that we've had throughout history. And when you have a large number of unemployed, you obviously have a massive disruption to society. The 1870 technological revolution led to World War I, led to World War II. And other technological revolutions have been just as disruptive. Now, as you look at this chart, you see the periodicity between the revolutions is getting shorter. We go from 200 years till 1780 to 100 years till 1870, and on we go. The periodicity matters. Society needs time to absorb and retrain the workers. We need time to get back on our feet as nations. We need time to get over the wars that we generally have had after these revolutions. But the periodicity between the technological revolutions is getting much, much closer together, much shorter. How fast are we moving as a society? How fast is history accelerating? Well, it's worth noting the period of time from the bronze sword to the steel sword is 4 times longer than the time from the steel sword to the nuclear weapon. We are moving extraordinarily quickly. Now, if you look at where we find ourselves today, you could argue we have 3 technological revolutions happening at the same time. 3 revolutions that are leading to massive disruption, 3 revolutions that are changing regions, 3 revolutions that are changing employment and employability. They're all happening within a decade of each other. Superintelligence and artificial intelligence, genetics, and energy. It is this complexity mismatch, it's this acceleration of history that also makes it hard for decision makers to make decisions when given warnings. I'll give you an example of complexity mismatch. Harry Markopolos is a quant. Harry Markopolos is a very, very smart hedge fund manager, and Harry Markopolos got a warning of a hedge fund run by a guy named Bernie Madoff. When Harry began to look at the Madoff hedge fund, he said he realized within 5 minutes it was a Ponzi scheme. How did he know? The math told him so. The data told him so. His education told him so. So what did he do? He went to his friends and said, this can't be right, can it? They said it is. He went to the SEC and said, please listen to me, won't you? They said no. He said, how are you ignoring your own data? The exact same story. He had 11 exchanges with the SEC over 9 years. He provided 3 highly complicated explanations of why Bernie Madoff was a fraud. And it was ignored every time. Do you remember when the SEC arrested or caught Bernie Madoff? They didn't. Bernie Madoff's kids turned him in. He went scot-free for decades. He stole $65 billion, the largest financial fraud in history. And the warnings were there in perfect data. Complexity and mismatch. It's very hard for people to understand these things. Now remember, the lawyers at the SEC at the time, well, they were lawyers. They were liberal arts grads. When Harry came in with a bunch of charts and math and numbers, they didn't understand it. They couldn't get it. That's a relatively easy thing. Imagine how hard this is going to be with superintelligence. Imagine how hard this is going to be with the nano. Imagine how hard this is going to be with new sources of energy, genetics, CRISPR. We're in real trouble if we can't begin to understand what's going on. So while that's an historical look back, the only value to this book would be if we can see something coming down the pike in the future. Can we apply the Cassandra coefficient to current warnings? At the end of the book, the final 7 chapters, we looked at 7 other threats. These are people right now pounding the table, warning us, explaining to us that these are species-level risks, things that could kill. There's a phrase that I learned right in this book, a word called gigadeath, billions of people killed. People who traffic in this world understand these horrible ideas. It's very difficult for us to get our heads around it. That's what they think about. When we wrote this book about a year and a half ago, the actual drafting, all 7 of these warnings seemed a little preposterous, a little out there. In a year since then, 5 of them, 6 of them, now seem, 5 of them actually seem, they've gone from fantastic to probable. I'm going to talk about 2. The first one is very timely. This is a warning being given to us right now by a noted professor named Alan Robach. Alan has picked up the work previously done by Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan in the 70s and 80s, very ingeniously, teamed with a group of Russian scientists and did a lot of study about what would happen if 1,000 nuclear weapons were thrown back and forth between the United States and Russia. Other than the death, other than the destruction, what would occur to the planet? What he discovered is you'd have massive fires. Those fires would create superheated plumes. The plumes would go in the mesosphere, and they would dump a huge degree of effectively dust and small particulate matter around the Earth. That leads to global nuclear winter. Global nuclear winter was considered so proven, so mathematically correct, so well modeled by the Russians and the Americans that Carl Sagan's theory led to a huge degree of disarmament talks, disarmament success. It's considered a really magical tool to help ease some of the tensions in the Cold War. He was considered correct. Alan Robach, our current Cassandra, went to go look at Sagan's work using obviously much more advanced computers, much larger models, and he said, wait a second, you don't just need thousands of weapons going back and forth. You could probably trigger a global nuclear winter with 40 weapons. Now 40 seems like a lot of nuclear weapons in a world when we've only used 2. 40 is not. I've worked on nuclear weapons strategy, nuclear planning. When the United States decides to hit a target, like perhaps North Korea, it's 30 weapons minimum. That's just our weapons. Nuclear weapons don't go in onesies and twosies anymore. So Alan Robach took a look at this, and his initial study was on Pakistan, India, and he came back and said that if they went to war, we'd have trouble, and he's since modeled a North Korea, a Korean Peninsula nuclear exchange. What he's found is if even 40 warheads are shared in between, this would trigger a global nuclear winter, where the entire Earth temperature would go down 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit, crop productions would go down 15 to 25%, and that would lead to 1 to 2 billion people dead. So while 40 weapons in the peninsula would be a horrific thing in and of itself, it could lead to a global catastrophe like we can't imagine. This is hard science, real data by an eminently qualified expert who's trying to get the word out there. Now the good news is Alan Robach and his team won the Nobel Prize last year for the work on nuclear weapons disarmament. His work on weapons disarmament is being well heard. His work on global nuclear weapons theory is not. I've had conversations with the parts of the US government that are making the nuclear weapons plans, that would be the ones who would actually press the button, and this theory is largely unknown to them. That's a real problem. The final risk I want to talk about is about artificial intelligence and then superintelligence. Artificial intelligence, meaning machines that do the work of humans, is all around us. It's your ATM machine. If you don't think you're already a cybernetic organism, try to survive without your phone or computer for a week. You are. Superintelligence is dramatically different. It's the idea that a computer can be quote-unquote smarter than a human at all tasks humans do. It's also called AGI, artificial general intelligence. I'll call superintelligence to make it easy to understand. It is definitionally very hard for our small brains to understand a thing that would be twice as smart, 10 times as smart, or 1,000 times as smart as us. But please understand, there is no real argument that this is coming. Every person involved with superintelligence or artificial intelligence down to only a couple dissenters, says, yes, we will get to superintelligence. Now, we don't know the how, and we don't know the when. That makes it very difficult to make the argument that we should be concerned about it, but it is coming. In fact, when it does come, it will come very quickly. We're talking about machines that program themselves. It's called self-recursive programming. This is a self-replicating technology. A little footnote. Any technology that's self-replicating or self-recursive and asymmetric is wildly dangerous. This is a self-replicating technology and has to be considered extraordinarily powerful. The only argument about this superintelligence, as I said, isn't if it will happen or not, it's if it will bring good tidings or bad. We spent some time with Eli Yudkowsky. He's our Cassandra in this part of the book. He's a man of extraordinary intellect and now of great stature who is dedicating his entire life to ensuring that superintelligence is safe, that it brings good tidings. It's a very difficult puzzle. He doesn't know the solution yet, but he's dedicated to it. And in fact, billions of dollars nominally are being dedicated now towards ensuring that superintelligence is done safely. Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates, Eli Yudkowsky, philosopher Nick Bostrom, who I think gave a Google talk, they all say, you better watch out. This is a species-level event of extraordinary risk. Others aren't so concerned. There's two possible outcomes, to make it simple, with superintelligence. One is personified here by this picture of Lobot from Star Wars. Lobot, as you can see, with his 1970s technology in his face, looks like an Atari console or something, but Lobot is a cybernetic machine, part human, part computer. Google's own Ray Kurzweil looks at this as the future of superintelligence. He tells a very rosy story that we don't have to be concerned about superintelligence because we will get the cybernetic interface and we'll be able to learn with, grow with, and control superintelligence because of our capacity to be part of it. He and others argue, the Lobot argument, that superintelligence will create an immense amount of good. And it will. This is the most powerful tool of all time. Any problem that can be solved by computation or intelligence will be solved by superintelligence. Problems we don't know exist will be solved by superintelligence. That means hunger, that means disease, that means death, that means climate change. This is the most powerful tool ever to be invented. And remember, as I said, it will be invented. There's no question of that. But it's been called our final invention. It will then invent everything else. And the question is, yes, it will give us all those great societal benefits as described, but what does it do then? So then you switch to the other picture here, and this is of the Terminator T-2000. And every conversation on superintelligence apparently has to show this picture, right? We've all watched this movie. We all know that robots will come for us. Footnote, part of the fact that that is so outlandish, part of the fact that Hollywood has peppered us with movies about robots coming to get us, makes us believe it's not going to happen. It makes us believe it's in the realm of fantasy and film, not in our actual lives. It's inured us to the threat. People like Gates and Hawking and others believe this is a real risk. And this is the way we'll personify it in this instance. The only way I could basically describe this is think about a genie coming out of the bottle. In every narrative, it gives you three wishes. I describe the goodness that we'll get from superintelligence. But then the genie is off to do its own thing. Now, I don't know if we'll control superintelligence. I don't know if Eli Yudkowsky will be right and we can put smart AI, if we can put ethics into the computer. I have a really hard time understanding how we will. But I know it's a question we have to address. Elon Musk calls this summoning the demon. And the one question people often ask is, well, can't you just turn it off? Well, why didn't chimpanzees hit the off switch on human beings? Again, every noted expert working on artificial intelligence agrees we will have superintelligence at some point, probably within the next 100 years. I would guess 25 years. This is a photo of the world Go champion losing to your computer here at Google called AlphaGo. And if you want to see the face of dejection, I think you can see it right there. This man, this Go tournament was watched by a huge number of people inside Asia. It was a massive event. It was a massive event sort of for popular media, but it also was a massive event in the superintelligence community. I called up and talked to one of the experts we had worked with on this chapter as soon as this win had happened. And I said, you told me that this wasn't going to happen in 5 years. And he said, I thought it wasn't going to happen in 5 years. And he was almost at tears. It's not supposed to have happened this quickly. Technology develops much faster than humans usually give it credit to be able to do. We are very, very bad as a race of understanding technological development. Complexity mismatch, which I mentioned before, is all over the issue of superintelligence. We do not understand what's happening here. Another issue called diffusion of responsibility is all over superintelligence. Can you tell me who at the White House is responsible for this? Can you tell me who in the Department of Defense is in charge of making sure we don't get killed by superintelligence and robots? I don't know who it is. But standing here, I believe Eli Yudkowsky, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Stephen Hawking is giving us the chance to listen to a Cassandra. This is a Cassandra moment. And if I, at the Google campus, didn't mention this, I'd be remiss. You are one of 2 or 3 places in the world legitimately in the race to create superintelligence. Google may well have the fate of humanity in its hands. It's an extraordinary statement. What other company in history could you say that about? Google's leaders, in some instances, have become dismissive about the threat of superintelligence. That worries me. Google's early manifesto was "Don't be evil." Google's new manifesto needs to be "Don't build evil." Cassandras are out there. We need to find them. We now have a tool to help us do so. And I think we can do a much better job at this. So Dick and I have dedicated a huge amount of our future effort to getting the word out about Cassandras. This wasn't about writing a book or making money. There's no money in books anymore. This was about getting a message out so others don't have to feel the dejection and the failure and the catastrophe of giving a warning and being ignored. We've created something called the Cassandra Award Foundation. You can see the board and jury up here. Some very distinguished individuals have joined us, including some former Cassandras. We have representatives from the military, from intelligence, from Wall Street, from medicine. And we, every year, will give out one award to one individual giving a warning we think needs more attention. We gave the award this year to Alan Robach. I mentioned earlier Alan's work on global climate change, on a new nuclear winter. We gave him the Cassandra Award. And part of the value here isn't that he gets to hold a piece of glass, as pretty as it is. Part of the value is that Alan's work ideally gets a little more of a voice. More people pay attention to what he was doing. The members of the board, you saw their names earlier, we've all committed to trying to get the story out. When we go on media now, we talk about Alan Robach. When we meet with government officials, we talk about Alan Robach and the fear that we all have of a global nuclear winter. We're going to give this award out every year. It is a nonprofit organization. The website's on there. Please nominate others you think need to be concerned, about whom we have to be concerned, and please donate if you're interested. The funds are used entirely to reward the award winner and to pay for publicity around the message. So thank you for taking the time, and please remember, we found a tool we think can help us avert catastrophes.
RP, thank you so much for joining us here and for being here. I'm properly freaked out, so I have a few questions for you.
You're not supposed to be freaked out. This is a good news story, right? We now have a tool.
Well, I so appreciate your being here, and I was hoping we could kick things off by talking a little bit about the perception of Cassandras. So one of the key things that you describe is that most frequently Cassandras are not paid attention to. Either they are not likable, they're abrasive, they don't look the part. And I was wondering if you could speak specifically about Miss Whitney and her experience, especially in light of the topic of the day.
So Meredith Whitney, the Cassandra who predicted the 2008 collapse, is a little different than some of our Cassandras for one primary reason. A lot of the Cassandras we looked at had something we call an off-putting personality. Now, I don't know if they had the off-putting personality the day they found the warning, but by the time we got to them and other people had interacted with them, a lot of them were relatively abrasive, and I guess you would generally call it kind of a low EQ, right? Sure. Meredith is not like that. Meredith Whitney is an extraordinarily charming, smart, and at that instance, you know, she was, in this year, 2008, she was a young female financial analyst at an investment bank. And that was a bit of a rarity to start with. Meredith was sitting at a cocktail party with the CFO of Citi. Citi was the largest corporation in the world at the time. And the lead analyst from another bank, a man of great repute, who was the Citi analyst from, I think, Goldman Sachs, don't quote me, said to the CFO of Citi, your company has become so complicated that I don't even bother modeling it anymore. And Meredith heard this and said, you know, what in the world? Your job is to model these companies. That's your duty and your responsibility to know what's going on. So she went back and redoubled her efforts to crunch the model on Citi. And of course, she made it, data. She came out with her model and said, Citi can't pay its dividend. For a financial stock of that size not to pay its dividend, it's the equivalent of the company almost going out of business. She also said it will go out of business. I mean, her report hit Wall Street like a blast and led to stocks tumbling. And she was right. All they had to do was go back and look at her numbers and see that this young analyst was correct. Because she was a woman, because she was an attractive woman, she got, all the press began to focus on the attractive young woman. Didn't focus on the numbers, didn't focus on the facts, didn't focus on her genius, focused on her sex and her outfits. And so if you go read the articles about Meredith Whitney, they talk about her heels and her, I mean, it's just extraordinarily sexist. She got death threats, she was hated, and it's very clear to me that if Meredith Whitney had been a stodgy old man and had made those predictions, she would have been just extraordinarily lauded for getting it. Right? Now, she was lauded. She was I think she was the cover of Fortune magazine. She was considered one of the great, and she is one of the great financial minds of the era. But she paid a very heavy price for it. And if it's not sexism, I don't know what it is. And this being the #MeToo moment, you know, it's worth understanding the biases. This is all about biases, right? The biases that go into getting that story wrong.
So in that same vein, for those Cassandras who are listening today, what would you recommend they do to improve their messaging?
There are people who are listening to this now who believe they know a catastrophe that's coming. Now, to be fair, some of them are just crazy, right? So we have a website where people have been nominating Cassandras. And we got something like, you know, we got a huge number of nominations last year. And a good quarter of them were people nominating themselves because they saw 9/11 happening or something. That they weren't data-driven experts in the field. Now, if you are a data-driven expert in the field, if you look at the Cassandra coefficient, the indicators of the Cassandra, if you are a proven technical expert, you are data-driven, and you are effectively the person that we hire, we train, hire, and trust to warn us on that topic, and you have a warning and you're not being listened to, you very well could be a Cassandra. So what do? It's not easy. As we've seen example after example, trying to get people to listen to your message. There's a number of different things, and one, get yourself nominated for the Cassandra Award. Two, understand that your messaging is now the second most important part two of your job. Part one was to get the data. Part two is to get the story out there. You have to effectively frame your warning to the decision makers. Now, as I told, all the previous Cassandras believed, look, I got the data, I got it right, it's been peer reviewed. Of course they'll believe me, right? To them, the data told the story. The data doesn't always tell the story. Harry Markopolos learned that the hard way. His data on Madoff did not tell the story. His data was inarguable. I mean, it was impossible for Madoff not to be a fraud, and he proved that numerically, but this data didn't tell the story. Your data will not tell the story. You need to tell the story. Or if you don't have a good EQ, if you don't have a good capacity to communicate, find someone who does. A Cassandra we talk about in the end of the book, who's now giving a warning on climate change, is Dr. Robert Hansen. Dr. Robert Hansen is the person who taught the world about climate change. Dr. Robert Hansen's science is absolutely peerless, peer-reviewed, and extraordinarily accepted. Robert Hansen, in 2015 or 16, wrote a new paper that said things are much worse than we thought they were. We talk about him in the book. He said, climate change is already horrible. We already know that, but it's going to get way worse, way faster than you believe. He put a paper out that wasn't peer-reviewed. He got slammed. This is the guy who proved it before. Again, a totally noted guy, put the message out and got slammed. He put another paper out. This time, he got slammed until they caught up with the science. Took 2 years. Everyone now says he's right. Right? Now, Robert Hansen has been arrested, I don't want to say the number, I think 4 times. He chained himself to the White House fence. He was a government employee. Like, he has done all he can to get the message out. Robert Hansen had to pair with Al Gore. Right? Al Gore is obviously a great personality, very well known. He paired with Robert Hansen, and they created Inconvenient Truth and got the story out. So sometimes the data and the expert needs to find effectively a marketing team to get the story out. Now, we want to do that with the Cassandra Award. We want to build the marketing team, you know, in a very light way. So your data won't tell the story. The other thing that has to happen is, in the intelligence community, going all the way back to the Pearl Harbor attack, which was a surprise attack, of course, the intelligence community talks about the difference between smoke and fire. So when you sit down with a principal, say a president or a secretary of defense or whatever, and say, I think something horrible is going to happen, in lots of instances, the intelligence analyst only can point to general smoke over the horizon. Again, this is just an analogy. What they need is fire. They need to say, here is specifically what's happening, specifically when it will happen, and here's how I can tell you it will happen. Now, intelligence analysts need to adapt a new methodology where they continually warn the decision maker about what's going to occur and show them the things that will happen going forward to prove they're correct. A great expression is, here's what will happen next week, next month, next year to show you that my scenario is correct. Another expression to use is, here's what could happen to show you I'm wrong. If we see this, I'm wrong. And the final tool, highly related, is to create the boundary conditions around the warning. If we see anything else happen in these boundary conditions, I'm also wrong. So going forward in describing where the smoke will turn into fire and how is critical. And then penultimately, finally, you need to then direct your collection to get the fire, right? In most of these instances, we did not have the intelligence we needed. 9/11, people believe it was a failure to connect the dots. That's not right. 9/11 was a failure to collect the necessary intelligence for that specific attack. We knew generically what was going to happen. We didn't know specifically what was going to happen. So get more intelligence. And then finally, you need to explain these things to people in parables. People don't learn from slides.
Sure.
People don't learn from numbers, as we said earlier. People learn from parables.
From the narrative.
From the narrative. So one tool that we've used before with clients is there's something very simple on the internet you can find where you can type some text and it looks like a New York Times headline. And then when you rip it, it looks literally like I ripped the front of the New York Times off. Sure. And you put it in front of a client and it says, CEO Johnson fails to make necessary fix, disaster strikes, whatever that narrative is. President of the United States fails to understand superintelligence risk, human species destroyed, So find the narrative, put it in front of them, make it a parable about them, and begin to get over that curve of their biases and their agenda inertia. These men and women are running major organizations, governments or companies, whatever, because they think they're good at making decisions. Other people believe they are too. It's hard to get them off their set agenda. So you have to make it about them.
Wonderful. So I'm also curious about the project that you mentioned that's happening at MIT. So you guys are developing great expertise in chatting with these Cassandras, people that they're being nominated, you were talking with them, identifying them, and awarding the one that you think is most relevant. But I was wondering about what they're doing at MIT, and specifically regarding the scalability of these principles. Is it possible to take in many, many possible Cassandras and apply this in a scalable fashion so that you can identify them without necessarily going through them with a fine-tooth comb and all of these experts?
What's happening at MIT is very promising but very small. And the question there gets more to what we just discussed previously. What's being studied there is how to be a predictive intelligence analyst. So how to use the Cassandra coefficient and other tools, how to be able to look around a corner, and then how to effectively frame that. So the cycle that we've just discussed about moving from smoke to fire to effective framing to getting the warning across to the decision maker is what was being looked at there and hopefully still is. What really needs to also happen with the Cassandra coefficient is the N has to increase, right? So we have about 8 or 9 examples in our book. I'd like to see 50 examples. I'd like to see them studied. I'd like to see false positives studied. And I'd like to increase the N so we can understand, take these 24 Cassandra coefficients, characteristics, and really build them out and grade them, understand when they may work or not work. And that could get your question of scale. But right now, this is a powerful tool. It's a discovery. I truly believe Dick and I discovered something important. It was out there the whole time staring us in the face. There's an expression called the invisible obvious, right? When you find it, you go, my God, I can't believe we missed that. I can't believe we've missed this for so long. I can't believe that these data-driven, highly credentialed experts time and time again get ignored. And by the way, it continues to happen, right? So today, and on the slides we use today, these are risks, these are disasters that happened up till 2011, might be the last one. The Grenfell Tower fire in London,
sure.
A recent train crash in the northwest of the United States. All of these had specific warnings that they were going to occur by credentialed experts and were still ignored. So we just have to get better at this.
changing gears slightly, I do want to get into some topical questions for you, but before we do, I was wondering, for those of us listening, I was wondering if there was a way that you can take these ideas and apply them to your personal life. Is there sort of the Cassandra warnings for one's personal work life, financial life, love life, whatever it might be? Can you apply them in the micro?
I think there's a couple of things that are worth understanding here. As a very macro thought, we all have to first just acknowledge two things about ourselves, right? The first one is most of us know the right thing to do most of the time, and doesn't mean we always do it. That's a self-discipline issue, and that's not the focus of this conversation. The second thing we have to know about ourselves is we are, unfortunately, largely just bags of meat driven by biases and heuristics, right? So if you go back and understand, from whence we came, yeah, you have to understand that this brain was formed 300,000 years ago, then 140,000 years ago, and it wasn't designed for the world in which we live. It was designed for groups of 140 people. Go read *Sapiens* by Harari. He describes this perfectly. That's what you walk around with all day between your ears. And the decisions that you constantly are making are driven first by your monkey brain. And then it takes a long time to get up to your more evolved brains and let impulse not lead automatically to response. The Cassandra coefficient acknowledges that decision makers have monkey brains. All of us have monkey brains and listen to them far too often. And we as individuals should realize that too. So I think inside, I'll give you a great example, please. Financial example, right? Now, 99.9% of investors in this country should never buy anything other than an index ETF fund. This is proven by every source of math you could possibly imagine, right? 99% of us should never buy anything but an ETF, an index fund. Yet, that's not the way we behave with our money. That's not the way I behave with my money. I believe, and it's called magical thinking, that I have a view others don't have. I know something they don't know. I can go buy or sell this stock and it's the right thing to do. That's foolish, right? The quantified experts and the data tell us something simple. We need to follow it. I'll give you another example, highly related. Lottery tickets.
It's not a good investment.
It's not as good as you'd think, right? Statistically, no one wins the lottery, ever, right? Yet, the amount of money put into the US lottery is unfathomable, and it's put in by the people least able to afford it. By the way, lotteries are a taxation on stupidity, and they are a social injustice put upon the poorest of our class by our governments, and they are an evil. Another example of where you just have to listen to the experts. So are there experts in our fields who we have to listen to? Yes. Will that help on a micro level? Sure.
For some. If we could dial things back for a moment, I'm curious about your company, Ergo, and how you got your start there. How did that company start? How did you transition from the public to the private sector?
I've just been really, really lucky to have great colleagues and bosses all the way along the line. Dick was really one of my first bosses and has been extraordinarily influential in my life all the way to today. He's godfather of our third child. He was a groomsman at my wedding, and I wouldn't be anything of who I am if it weren't for all of his time and influence and love, and I can't thank him enough. And after I left government, I got to work at some great organizations, the Monitor Group with Mark Fuller, Gerson-Lamrin Group with Mark Gerson and Alexander St. Amand. And then from Gerson-Lamrin Group, I created Ergo with my partners, Matthew Moneyhon and Evan Pressman. And Ergo is now 14 years old. And we came out of, it really is a reflection of where we came. It's a reflection of diplomacy and intelligence and research, and that's what Ergo does. And that's where my partners come from as well. And it's been a huge joy. And what we do at Ergo is part of what we're talking about today. We try to give people frameworks to understand the future. Now, this is a framework to understand catastrophes. This framework works on other things too, but there's only a few proven frameworks about how to look around corners. Scenario planning, virtual markets, Cassandra theory. So we try to bring those frameworks to our clients. And we're a little different in that we infuse our analysis almost entirely with on-the-ground intelligence. So we've paid 36,000 people for information in 14 years, all around the world. People from shop floors to truck drivers to people in and around cabinets and parliaments and kings. And we collect that intelligence, put it into frameworks. This is a big difference, frameworks, and then try to help our clients see what's happening.
So in a few interviews, I've heard you described as a spy.
I'm not a spy.
Well, that's what you always say. But I'm curious, What are, you can only speak in generalities, I'm sure, but for some of the clients, like who are some clients, or what projects have you done for clients that they're particularly happy with? What have you come and discovered and shared?
So what's worth noting is, what does the CIA actually do? Right? Now, we believe we saw the James Bond film and saw the Jason Bourne films, that must be something like they do. That's not what they do, right? CIA, half the house is a group of really, really smart analysts who have obviously access to an extraordinary amount of intelligence. They do analysis and they try to give warnings and insights to the executive branch. And then what's the State Department do? Well, that's a little better understood. The State Department is a series of ambassadors and on down who represent the United States to foreign governments. Ideally, Ergo has aspects of both, right? Where we help companies and governments represent themselves and operate in foreign areas and in the United States and give them the intelligence to do so. Now, is that a spy? No, it's not. Examples that I'm proud of, we have some great examples of helping the US government defeat IEDs that were killing our soldiers. There was a great organization called JIDO, the Joint IED Defense Defeat Organization out of the US DoD. It's a really cool example of the US government getting its act together, realizing there's a threat, and putting a huge amount of resources at it very quickly and kind of getting around bureaucracy. While working with JIDO, we're very proud for some of the work we're able to do to help stop some of the most potent IEDs who are killing our soldiers in Iraq, as well as in Afghanistan. So that gives us huge pride. On a corporate side, we've had a lot of work helping people not get involved with frauds. We've helped, I'll give you a quick example. A very, very large investment house wanted to start a whole new fund in a non-American country, and they were going to build it around a particular team, and a team that had extraordinarily positive reputation. They hired us to do diligence. It's a core aspect of our business is diligence. And our diligence came back and said, yes, by every report, these people are extraordinary and influential. The problem is we've discovered that they're under investigation for corruption. They know it, they're lying to you, it's not public record, we're able to unearth it. So we saved that company, by their estimates, $1 billion of embarrassment and cost by going into that enterprise, because the allegations of corruption would eventually have come out. There's numerous stories like that. Sure. But effectively helping people create, in a world of opacity, we try to create transparency. And it's no different than what a Google search does in many instances, but just much bigger and more specific.
I was hoping we could transition to start talking about a few things that are going on today. You mentioned North Korea, and it's something that I think everybody here is concerned about. And I wonder if we're almost past the point of needing a Cassandra here, because it's a great fear by many. So I'll ask you that. And then number two, I'm curious about the solution. So Cassandras have alerted us to this. People are worried. What is there to be done?
All right. So first, Alan Robach, who is just, the human race should be very thankful to have Alan Robach amongst us. And his organization, as I said, won a Nobel Prize last year, so he's not going unnoticed. But Alan's work on global nuclear winter is a warning we have to listen to. So that warning hasn't been heard. We were talking earlier about the amount of nuclear weapons that would likely be exchanged if we had a nuclear attack, a nuclear war.
You said 30 is the
I think 30 is
starting point.
Your starting point, right? So if you think about the series of targets that we would have to hit in North Korea to have some degree of confidence that Seoul isn't turned into an inferno, or Tokyo, or Guam, or even California, or even DC, depending on where North Korea is in its nuclear weapons development, it's a large number of targets.
And you're saying that those 30 strikes would need to happen quickly then? So
They'd have to happen almost simultaneously. It very much depends on what your theory of war is in this instance, but the one that seems to make most sense to me, and I think most sense to our nuclear weapons planners, I can't say with huge confidence, is 30 at once, right? If we are going to do it, we're going to do it. Right? This isn't Hiroshima or Nagasaki where we unveil the power of the sun. Have you ever seen it before? Which is almost a mystical thing. This is a tactical strike to take out military capacities. So you're looking at probably 30 minimum. Now, do we need a warning about that? We're separating two things. Do we need a warning about our risk with North Korea? Maybe not. I want to talk about it. Do we need a warning about nuclear winter? Absolutely.
Got it.
All right, so we've made that warning. Now, what's going on with North Korea? As we sit here today, I think we have a general sense of ease. We had the Olympics, it all went well. We're beginning to believe that the North Koreans are just like we are, right? Don't the Russians love their children too? as Sting and police at one point in the middle of the Cold War, and we said, yes, they do, and look, it all worked out just fine. Well, the great gobbledygook machine of Washington, D.C., which is my view, it's actually Colonel Mike Sheehan's view, Ambassador Mike Sheehan's view of sort of how policy really gets formed in D.C. The State Department and Brookings and Heritage and all these guys kind of have a view, and they sort of say, yeah. So the gobbledygook machine view of North Korea for decades has been, they are rational. Don't worry. They don't want to nuke anybody. They don't want to get nuked. They know that they're massively overpowered. We got this one. We're going to negotiate our way. We will negotiate our way out of it. That is the standard view. I hope it's right. I don't have much evidence that it is. There's some recent evidence, and only recent, by the third Kim, that they will be responsible nuclear weapons actors, because they said they would be. If you look at the proliferation of Israel, India, Pakistan, even South Africa and Brazil, when they were pursuing weapons programs, they all were very clear to transmit to us, don't worry, we're not crazy. We will handle these weapons responsibly. North Korea said the opposite for 3 generations, 3 decades, however you want to look at it. They've said, when we get weapons, we're going to turn Seoul into fire, we're going to unify the peninsula under our rule. They've said very aggressive things. Now, we want to believe normalcy bias, right? We want to believe, confirmation bias, more normalcy bias, we want to believe that they're going to be well behaved. Right? Just makes me feel good. I don't have the evidence yet. As I said, we've seen a little. I would never, the Trump administration is now grappling with this and trying to understand the question themselves. North Korea has just offered to have a negotiation with us. Everyone thinks this is great news. It's not bad news. What North Korea is very likely doing right now is trying to get the technological advance to have the ICBM move and deliver a payload. Right now the ICBM moves in the proper radius. Yeah. But they have yet to prove that they can successfully deliver a payload. When they prove that, which is another technological feat, they will have the entire set of cards in front of them that they need to negotiate, if they want to negotiate.
So you're saying you believe that it's possible that North Korea is delaying such that they can miniaturize the payload so it can be delivered and so that they're more powerful negotiators? I
would bet you dollars to donuts they are delaying as long as they can to get that final reentry proved. Why not? Right? Now, there is good news. There are a series of things inside the nuclear weapons complex of North Korea that may have been built just to trade. Let's see. Now, there have been countries that have turned, right? I mean, I mentioned South Africa changed of goodwill. They're under sanctions as well, but they got out of apartheid. Burma has had an extraordinary change out of sanctions. They changed to a transparent country. Maybe North Korea will too. It has happened before. And let's just hope it does in this instance, or we are in for a very, very difficult puzzle. North Korean puzzle is a hard one.
So the Cassandras that you listen to on this subject, what do they say about the future? We agree it's a problem. We agree it's a potential catastrophe. Is there a solution?
There's absolutely a solution. If North Korea decides, look, we have something they want, they have something we want. There's a negotiation to be had. They want their children, the leaders in North Korea, and there's probably only about 150 people who matter in that country right now as far as decision making. The leaders in North Korea, like any good parent anywhere, probably wants their kids to work at Google someday, right? They probably want their kids to play in the Stanford basketball team or the sure. University of Illinois, soccer team, right? Why not be part of this dream? And right now, of course, North Korea can have none of that. They want to be part of commerce. They want debt. They have massive oil reserves offshore they want to develop. They want to be wealthy. We can give that to them, but we're not going to give that to them until they give us what we want, which is that they denuclearize. Now, there's a number of outcomes. There's one I'm afraid of. One outcome I'm not excited about would be if North Korea and America strike a deal that says, we're going to keep our nukes, we're going to keep our short-range missiles, but we'll give up the ICBMs. So you, America, can sleep soundly in your beds while Seoul and Tokyo rip their hair out. That is one possible negotiated outcome. If this administration, any administration negotiates that, it would be the absolute end of Pax Americana, of the American promise to be a global leader in good standing. It would be the end of that if we left our allies high and dry like that. But it's going to be very tempting, particularly to people who don't understand the cost of destroying Pax Americana. Another outcome would be total denuclearization. That would be a dream scenario. We would have to give them a series of guarantees, not only let them back into the world as I described, we'd have to probably guarantee their security to some extent, we'd have to stop military exercises, etc. Look, that would be great for everybody. It'd be great for them, it'd be great for us. The only people who almost lose a little bit in that scenario is China, because they no longer have North Korea to keep us busy, and they've got all of a sudden a country that could potentially be our ally sitting on their border, right? They don't.
Sure.
They may not want things to go that well.
Mr. Bolton, John Bolton, has started in the White House, and of all the many scary things that have happened in the past year, it seems like the tenor of people positing fears about him have been a little bit different. That this is truly something scary, and it's almost like people that his hawkish history could be something different. Combining that with other people leaving the White House, who are generally supposed to be moderating forces, and the possibility of the Mueller investigation coming to a head, and Trump now truly needing a distraction. I'm wondering if you have any fears about their deciding together with John Bolton, encouraging what he seems to have always encouraged, and Trump wanting to divert attention from what might be coming down on him. Might that be a combination of things that would be a perfect storm for us to have a preemptive strike and eliminate the possibility of even having a negotiated disarmament? So,
Guy, I wish I could give you a lot of confidence that that's not likely or possible. I just don't know. It's a reasonable Cassandra warning, right? But let me offer you a slightly different view of the Bolton presence as our national security advisor. First of all, we're all very mimetic animals, right? So when the press shows us a series of quotes from John Bolton about destroying 10 floors of the UN, or how every other nation is just a satellite that orbits around our sun, etc., or how he's talked about a preemptive strike on North Korea, etc., walk out of the Iran deal, it's very easy to get very concerned, particularly married with some of the belligerent language we've seen from the president. I'm not sure that's wrong, but I have a slightly different view. My view is where we were headed before Bolton was scarier. So Rex Tillerson is gone, H.R. McMaster is gone, Mattis and Kelly are still around, but a huge number of people who were given to Trump, foisted on Trump, selected by Trump have left. And what we're beginning to see, and I think there was no surprise to us 4 months ago when we began talking about this with our clients 5 months ago, we're seeing Trump begin to get very comfortable in his presidency and believe that he's able to make these decisions on his own. So I call it TOHO, T-O-H-O, Trump on his own. And I think any president on his own, any president making complex decisions on his own is bad news. I think a president who doesn't have the depth of experience or lacks the experience as this president does is doubly bad news. So what I want to not see more than anything is I don't want to see Trump on his own. I don't want Toho. I want smart, wise counsel around every president, particularly this one. John Bolton and I have probably wildly different opinions on how to exercise American power, but we want the same thing. We believe in American exceptionalism. We believe America has either a right or an obligation, or however you want to call it, as the preeminent power. I tend to believe more that Pax Americana, living up to the system of treaties we wrote, being a positive ally, being there when people believe we'll be there, even if it's a little late, is the way America has power and benefits us around the world. I think his view is less interested in alliances and more interested in military force. That's bad, as far as I'm concerned. What's good is that he is part of the mainstream conversation. John Bolton is not Steve Bannon. I look at Steve Bannon as a guy who wanted to tear down the temple and had an extraordinary, really outside the mainstream point of view of things. John Bolton's not there. He's way to the end, but he's still in the mainstream. He's been an undersecretary of defense. He's been he's been a real member of the foreign policy establishment for a long time. He knows how it works. He knows the value of the civil servants. He knows the value of the flag officers. He knows the value of the diplomats. He knows how you can extract value from alliances. So I'm hoping when he sees a really crazy idea, he'll know it. The second thing about John Bolton, he's got a really strong personality and a really loud voice. So Trump on his own maybe will get mitigated by John Bolton because he will be in the room, he won't be ignored, and Trump can't toss him out like he tossed other people out. He can't toss him out for being a globalist, he certainly isn't. He can't toss him out for being more liberal than him, he certainly isn't. He can't toss him out for being stupid, he isn't. So I don't think we're going to see Trump ignoring Bolton for very long. We'll see how long it lasts. So what that means is Trump won't be on his own. At least he'll have Bolton joining Mattis and Kelly, giving him what we hope is wise counsel, which every president needs.
Final question for you. This is not just a book, but it's a movement that you're starting here. You have the awards that you're giving out for Cassandras that you identify as some of the most credible. But you have another one called the White House National Warning Office that you and Richard Clarke are proposing.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and what your vision for it is.
Good question, Guy. Thanks for asking about that. So look, I mean, I truly believe that Dick and I found something that previously existed was these Cassandras, right? The people out there are giving us warnings of disasters. We know what they look like. We know how to separate the Cassandra from the Chicken Little, and we need to do that. We have to institutionalize this process. So the Cassandra Award is one step. The other one is a national warning office at the White House, inside the executive office of the president. It needn't be a bureaucracy. I'm not talking about a large number of people. I'm probably talking about a half a dozen men and women who work within the EOP, so they have that imprimatur of the White House, and now get to work across the interagency, training people on Cassandra theory and other theories, looking for warnings, and trying to give voice to warnings that haven't been heard before. It would be an extraordinarily wise thing to do. We no longer have the National Intelligence Officer for warning, the job that Charlie Allen had where he foresaw Saddam's invasion of Kuwait. That job's gone. We don't have that job anymore. We need an institution inside government that's cross-cutting and is able to sort of see the forest for the trees and can find warnings before others do. This organization could create conferences, could create allies, could work throughout the interagency, could task intelligence, and could take warnings, put them through something like a Cassandra coefficient or other even better models, I don't care what it is, no pride of authorship, and see if those warnings deserve more attention or not. Why not build something like this? Why not find a tool to give voice to the warnings that we've been ignoring time and time again? It would cost effectively nothing, and the outcome could be extraordinary. Think about the return I mentioned on Fukushima, right? $50 million would have saved $100 billion. 50 million, 100 billion, 2,000 time return, right? A little bit of effort to listen to the warnings could serve us dramatically.
I look forward to it.
You can be the head of it.
I appreciate it. I'll look forward to joining. Warnings, Finding Cassandras to Stop Catastrophes. Thank you so much for coming to Google.
Thanks very much, Guy. Great to be here.